I love characters with energy absorption powers, but clearly not as much as the crew working on any of the Ben 10 series, because the show as a whole, whether it be classic, Alien Force, Ultimate Alien or Omniverse, are absolutely littered with energy absorbing vampire stand-ins, and in some cases, literal vampires. So today we'll be taking a look at Ben 10's energy vampires. On a scale that's ranging from characters and aliens who can and do absorb energy as a part of their power sets, to characters, in most cases villains, who feed off of energy to survive, but end up gorging themselves on as much energy as they can get a hold of. I'll be covering them for the most part as they appear in series, focusing predominantly on the characters and their similarities to one another, then talking about the individual aliens that dip their toes in the energy vampire pool. Then wrap things up with my general takeaways. Starting off with, and the reason I say for the most part as they appear, let's start with my favourite character in the franchise, and one I'm sure is no surprise to any of you who are familiar with the channel. We've got Kevin 11, the blueprint for energy absorption characters and the first one that comes to mind, for me at least. Out of series, I think of characters like Rogue, Parasite, Van Cleis, the Absorbing Man and Bishop. No surprise that the team over at Man of Action may pull some comic book inspiration, seeing as they're a group made up of comic creators. Back to Kevin 11. Depending on which iteration of the series we're looking at, it changes his origin up a bit between mutant and alien, but either way, the same result. Kevin is an Osmosian with the ability to absorb energy from anything. That including more abstract things like mana, or absorbing what, for the sake of keeping things neat and tiny, whatever energy makes up a species' DNA, allowing Kevin, or other Osmosians, we'll touch on them in a moment, the ability to grab a hold of whatever alien species they'd like and absorb their abilities to a lesser extent, as seen with Kevin's debut with Heat Blast and Forearms, or later Agrigor with Galapagos' species. This leading to the multiple occasions Kevin absorbed the DNA of each of Ben's alien roster, transforming into an amalgam made up of all bits and pieces of each of them. Moving away from the Omnitrix and DNA-specific absorption and getting back to the more standout uses of energy, they can also output the energy they absorb like we see from Kevin's dad Develin during the Alien Force flashbacks. This feeling very reminiscent of Bishop from X-Men. Keeping on our Osmosians, at least pre-retcon, the character Agrigor found a workaround to only be able to absorb a percentage of a species' abilities by converting each being to pure energy, allowing him to absorb each of the Andromeda 5 fully, and along with that and really getting into the vampire part of Energy Vampire, Agrigor, even with only getting that benefit of a bit of their ability, shows us his and presumably the other Osmosians on this list absorb the life completely out of others, leaving them a lifeless husk. That, and it's pretty quick too. I wonder if that's a result of Agrigor doing this fairly often, meaning he's pretty proficient at it, or Galapagos' species being pacifists and not resisting, or a combination of both. Or maybe all Osmosians, including Kevin, could do this. What would happen if Kevin grabbed a hold of a heavy hitter like, let's say, Vilgax or even maybe Malware, and just absorbed the life from them, before either of the two could muster the strength to stop him? And our last Osmosian and the third member of the 11 family tree, Develin, who can presumably absorb energy the same way as the others, but we don't see him making use of that ability in series, but we do see him transform in and out of Kevin's original amalgam form at will. The fun implication with that being that Osmosians can pass down what they've absorbed to their kids. So for a moment, let's go off the assumption that Osmosians were an alien species like with Alien Force. If there had been a family tree of Osmosians absorbing enough abilities and having kids, would they get compounding abilities in a very one-for-all My Hero Academia kind of way? There's also the idea that like Develin or even Kevin 11,000, our Kevin, along with Agrigor, should have the ability to go in and out of their amalgam forms at will. Moving on, and maybe less exciting, but very much one of the big three I think of when I think energy vampires in Ben 10, we have the original energy vampire, Zombo, who in researching this video I'm finding out his name is Hubert. As such, Hubert can absorb and feed off of positive energy caused by people's emotions, leaving them weakened and lethargic. Him using a machine to achieve this, so he has the ability to feed off of what I'm going to call life energy, but either can't do it without the assistance of the machine, or he's greedy to the point where he uses the machine to amplify the process so he can intake more souls. I use the terms souls and life energy pretty loosely there. In later appearances, he ends up feeding off of fear rather than positive energy, but I suppose he's still an emotional energy vampire. His character sort of feels like he falls somewhere between the Joker, Scarecrow, and Dracula. As far as where he popped up from and how he got these powers, we know he's human, but we don't know if he was born like this, or if he got the ability to feed off of others' emotions later in life. It was teased out of series that at some stage he was bitten by a zombie and left to die before a circus came by and rescued him, but that's not in series. And that's all we really have on Zombo. So my takeaways so far before we move on, this video's narrative is going one of two ways. If we're purely looking at the classic series or omniverse onwards, it seems a strange coincidence that the mutants of Earth oftentimes are born some form of energy vampire, like with Kevin or Zombozo, or pre-omniverse, post the alien hybrid explanation that Alien Force slapped on every other character, we've got a bit of a pattern with alien hybrids often turning out to be energy vampires. And seeing as without our main cast interference, that type of alien hybrid tends to do pretty well on Earth. Like with our next character we'll cover, Michael Morningstar, who, jumping ahead a bit, like Zombozo, would end up becoming a pseudo-zombie vampire. Introduced to the series as a potential and pretty promising fourth member of the Alien Force trio, Michael's revealed to be responsible for the zombified high school girls running about the place. Them being a result of Michael feeding off of their energy, leaving them these, like I said, zombified husks obsessed with him. Him presumably feeding off of others his entire life. As a side note, but pretty important, we never actually see Michael's family, but seeing as he's a plumber's kid and introduced as a likely alien hybrid, you could reasonably assume that at least one of his parents, if not someone in his family line, is whatever species has this ability. Having used up their partner, then leaving them and Michael behind, or they intentionally had Michael, leaving him on Earth to feed off of whoever. This eventually escalating in Michael feeding off of Gwen, a human anodite hybrid, but put a pin in that, we'll mention that later on. Anodites, being beings made up of mana, allows Michael to drain so much energy that he gets this new supercharged golden form, boosting his abilities however much. Before Gwen, and keep this in mind, drains the energy right back out of him, leaving him weakened in this new grey form. From there, he degrades away, becoming more and more disfigured as he feeds off of rats, dogs, and whatever he can get hold of, just to stay alive. To elaborate on why exactly this is, following getting a taste of an anodite's energy, his body adapted to it and got used to it, giving him the benefit of that golden form, but on the other hand becoming reliant on it, leaving him in this weakened greyish state, unable to sustain even his normal form from what he was used to feeding off of. Now before I forget the most powerful energy vampire in the series, we have anodites. Like I said, anodites are energy beings who can manipulate and control mana, resulting in everything we see from Gwen and her grandma Verdona in series, including seeing Gwen absorb the energy taken away by Michael Morningstar, and more. Along with that, and what adds to my ramblings, they can absorb mana from other living beings, like we see from Verdona absorbing it from plants, or Gwen absorbing it from whatever. I presume the DNA aliens during War of the Worlds Part 2. And for the sake of it, all these forms of energy we see may as well be someone's life force, since taken to the extreme, mana, emotional energy, DNA I guess, being absorbed enough should presumably leave someone lifeless. Actually, maybe not Michael's powers, seeing as all his victims are left zombified, but maybe that's an intentional move on his part, leaving them alive so they can hopefully recoup their strength so he can feed off of them again later. Speaking of life force and all that, and a suitable segue to Ben's alien transformations that vary in just how appropriate they may be for this video, let's start off with Feedback, whose main ability is to absorb and redirect energy attacks, mostly in the form of electricity. However, in the episode TGIS, Dr. Animo sends out all these chupacabras, who use these little machines on their back to gather life energy, to reanimate Argost in his new Chimera body. And to be crystal clear, Animo says, I use the chupacabras to drain the life force needed to power the machine. Argost and Animo ending up being a pretty big deal with control over their amalgam cryptid army, only for Ben as Feedback to come in, plug his conductoid bits into Argost's new body, draining all the life force right out from him, leaving his lifeless body on the ground, and shooting all the energy he took from him and that took 3 years to gather, into the sky. I presume this is down to his weird new body allowing Ben to do this, but I can see an argument that Feedback could drain the energy out of a lot of species to the point they're down for good. In saying that, Feedback's never seen holding on to any energy, and seemingly has to offload it, but either way, similar results just without the need for it. Next up, and by and far the most reasonable species to cover in this video, the quite literal vampire in Whampire. Ben's Vladat transformation, the extinct species of space vampires from the Anor system, who were wiped out by the combined efforts of all the rest of the Anor system, teaming together to incinerate the species. Prior to that, their main food source was Frankenstoic species, using them as both a food and labour source. They've got all the vampire abilities you'd expect, but more relevant to this video, it comes down to 2. Their ability to absorb and feed off of energy from living beings through their fangs, this apparently being able to affect species as powerful celestial sapiens, somehow. And not to spoil my takeaway too much, but the crew stated that if a Vladat fully drained someone, they'd be left in a similar state to Michael Morningstar's victims. Which, and a bit of a stretch, maybe Darkstar or Michael Morningstar is part Vladat, however many generations back that would have been. Though I'd say we're a lot more likely to see him partially being a species that developed in a similar way, rather than being a Vladat hybrid himself. The other important ability, and another reason I'm not throwing the Vladat label at Michael, Vladats can produce these little bats that attach themselves to their victims, allowing that Vladat to control them as a sort of pseudo hive mind, which Michael, while he does seem to have some influence over the zombified victims, isn't doing all that. And to wrap up our list, we've got 2 more transformations, those being NRG and Chromostone. NRG being pretty straightforward, and to summarise this section, it's more energy, less vampire. Kind of like an honourable mention before my final thoughts. NRG literally feeding off of energy, growing larger and more powerful the more he gets, that energy being in the form of radiation, like we see from some uranium he eats, along with feeding directly off of a nuclear reactor. Not a lot to this one. Actually, in Pandor's episode during the finale in the nuclear power plant, could Kevin have just absorbed all the excess radiation right out of him, or would that have damaged Kevin in some way? And finally, Chromostone, who's more akin to feedback than NRG, seeing as he can absorb and redirect energy like feedback, and unlike NRG, doesn't need to absorb it to survive. He can also produce energy anyway, just amplifying it with the more energy he absorbs. And for my final thoughts, the team behind Ben 10 are absolutely energy vampire obsessed, but so am I. Their frequency paints a pretty interesting picture of the series' universe at large, with so many beings having such similar, somewhat dark abilities. And in saying that, if we're going with my energy vampire title, it's fun that 2/3 of the Alien Force trio are energy vampires. That and the spread of characters or aliens that can absorb energy is pretty evenly mixed between Ben's Omnitrix aliens, other main characters, and actual series villains. That and a bit of a throwaway, Vilgax gives the energy vampire thing a go during the Ultimate Alien Force era of the show, through a machine that allows him to absorb defeated heroes along with the Dagon. If you've made it this far into the video and aren't subscribed, please consider doing so. Either way, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for watching.